Welcome from a very sunny London, which makes a change. Usually we're here at these live streams saying welcome from a very grey London, but it's sunny. Welcome from London. My name is Wayne Clark and welcome to our third or fourth, I think, live stream. This is a multi-platform live stream. So this is going out on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, I think, and somewhere else. So whichever way you've arrived here, I think LinkedIn is primarily the focus and the community that we talk to very much. So thank you very much for being here. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you some of our insights, tools, best practices, tips, and things that we've learned on the journey of engaging with thousands and thousands of managers. This is a really important topic. We're going to talk about why people leave managers. We're going to talk about what we can do to solve some of those things. I actually began to run a poll this morning about an hour ago. So this is live on Wednesday morning. I probably should have done it before, but the response is quite overwhelming. And I asked the question, how many people have had a toxic manager or a toxic boss? And usually we've got quite a balance in votes on polls. And this is so far 97% said that they have unfortunately had a toxic boss or toxic manager. If you've had one of those type of managers, I suspect you probably don't want to stick around for too long. And we're going to look at some of the reasons why. I guess it's easy to say people leave managers. Yes, they do, which is, of course, the topic of the show. People do leave managers. We do know that. But we're going to talk about why. We're going to get into some of the top 5 things that we found out from our research. It's an action-packed session. We've got an hour. I'm going to try and cram in as much as possible, and we're going to get to this. So we've got an action-packed live stream lined up for you this morning. Roll the VT. So I'm excited, I'm hyped up. We've done a lot of prep in terms of looking at some of the research that we thought you might find useful. Our job, my focus on these live streams is to try and give you as much insight as possible from all of the people that we keep bumping into in our work around the world. If this is the first time that you've encountered us or met with me or our organization, we're called the World Class Manager Team, and we work all around the world, as the name suggests, with lots of different organizations and governments. Our team is split from here in the UK and also in Europe through all the way to the Far East. And actually, we've got a large component of our business based in Mongolia, as well as the Middle East as well. So a huge thank you for being here. And as I said, I'm really hyped up to share with you some of these insights. What we focus on are not sort of theoretical ideas, right? This is not a lecture. This is nothing to do with an academic view of this. This is all based on practical things that we've learned and engaged with, picked up from all of these great people that we've come into contact with all around the world. So yes, the topic is people leave managers, but we're going to go a little bit deeper and look at some of the reasons why that might be the case. I wanted to start off with a fact, so let's get cracking. 81% of managers that we've surveyed, now to put this in context, over 50,000 managers have been through our World Class Manager program. We've interviewed and surveyed 15,500 managers on a range of questions. 81%, and this is why I wanted to set this up as a context setter for the rest of this session, 81% of the managers that we've surveyed said they believe that the product or services of their organization could be better. Now, when we started to uncover this research, we found it so mind-blowing. I found it mind-blowing. I've spent much of my career involved in employee engagement, in feeding back engagement scores to CEOs and leadership teams. If you think about your own employee survey, staff satisfaction survey, colleague feedback survey, whatever you call it, you're probably asking a range of questions, to do with how do we feel about the manager, the leader, the values, the culture, all of that good stuff, and it's all relevant. What we often don't do is ask managers specifically about insights to do with operational improvement, because as we often know through the feedback of the survey, most people have quite a clear idea and a strong point of view on what the organization can do to improve. When we uncovered this number, it really knocked me off my feet, because 4 out of 5 managers are suggesting to us, based on this survey, that we could improve what we do. Now, the big question we asked was, well, who's listening to those, to the 80% of managers who believe this? And what we often find in many organizations is not many people actually, because there isn't a mechanism geared up to listen intently to this type of insight and feedback. The reason why I wanted to share this up front is because I think it sets the context in a way for many of the things we're going to talk about and I'm going to share with you in this session, and we might keep coming back to this because I think it's such a compelling statistic. Now, in terms of where we pick up this research and this work from, we've worked now in over 30 countries around the world, worked with over 50,000 managers. I've personally had the opportunity to work with over 1,000 different CEOs. If you imagine a CEO spectrum, right, of 1,000 CEOs, from your deeply empathic, want to hug you all day, feed you grapes, hold you in a loving caress and tell you the world will be good. Then there's that type of CEO on one end of the scale, all the way through to the other side of the scale, which is probably like a clinical psychopath. And I pray that you never meet such people. Right? We've met them for you. You don't have to. So we've got this incredible spectrum of insight, learning, best practice, tools, tips, insights. And what we've been doing is learning from what some of these leaders do. And more importantly, in a way, asking the question, so what? What can we do with this? You know, I'm a new manager. It's my first time in a management role. What can I do that would make a difference in terms of my role and the impact of my team? You may be a super experienced manager and may forget some of these things that are so important and so essential. So we'll be sharing some of that with you. You may be a CEO where you've got a huge population of managers. We work with some organizations who have tens of thousands of managers. How do you as the CEO get your arms around this community and as a HR director or a chief people officer and try and move them in lockstep through some form of development? Again, we'll look at how relevant that is to what we're discussing here today. And probably the bigger and more complex the organization, the more of a concern that a leaky bucket in terms of talent will be cost-wise, culture-wise, strategically for your organization. So we'll get into some of that. And you may be new to the world of management. It may be a goal for you that you want to become a manager or a leader of an organization in, you know, one point in your career. You may be way before that. Like, why would you do it? Anyone who's got experience as a line manager will tell you it's a ridiculous idea because human beings are emotionally charged or unpredictable. Why would you want to manage people? But if you are hell-bent on managing people, then of course this is going to be of value to you. And again, what we're hopefully going to do is help you to avoid some of the pitfalls that some of these other managers have fallen into, or unfortunately, some of their teams have fallen into and then decided to vote with their feet and get out of the organization. We took our research and we crushed it. We shrunk it down into a book form, which launched about 12 months ago. So if you follow me on LinkedIn or on any other platform, we've been in the process for the last year of launching the book around the world. We're not done. We go to South Africa at the back end of next month and then back again to Saudi Arabia. And then we launch in the Netherlands, actually, in back end of May. So the road trip continues of sharing our work and insights around the world. And again, I'm really wonderfully excited that we've got this forum, this mechanism, this channel to share with you some of our insights, tools and tips, because we come across so much. And of course, I like to share as much as possible. And this is a great forum to do so. But let's get your feedback. Let's see what you think. So a few things I wanted to try and cram into this. There were actually 5. If you read the invite for the session, there were 5 key things, but I can never stick to a script, mainly because I don't have a script. Actually, someone asked me the other day, how do you script and plan your things? Well, this is probably like a bad expose, but this is my script, right? Here's a script for the session. So it's kind of unscripted. We've got 5 big things I want to talk about. I'll try and cram in 6 or 7. Let's see how we get on and let's kick it off. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk about is what we call the role of the 21st century manager. Now, this is the beginning part. It's the first phase of the program that we run called World Class Manager, where we go in depth and we ask some very fundamental and very simple questions about what the role of the manager is in the organization. And you may say this sounds a little bit too simple. This sounds a little bit naive. Of course, the job of the manager is to manage people, maybe get the best out of people. Yes, of course it is. But what we're talking about is how often does the organization reinvestigate what the fundamental role of the manager is in 2024, on March the 27th, 2024. What is the job of the manager? And the reason why we ask this question is because we like to ask CEOs, if you were to restart this organization from scratch today, or you were to receive X million or X billion of funding in order to create this organization from scratch starting today, would the role of the manager right now be what it is at the moment? It's not a conundrum or a riddle, this, but if you think about it, we've evolved in every organization culturally, into what the current role of the manager is. Would that be different if you were to restart the organization? In most cases, most CEOs, most chief people officers say probably yes, because the world of the manager has constantly shifted and changed. As a line manager, you're expected to be everything from this ESG expert, a D&I expert. You're expected to be able to look after people's mental well-being. There is a huge range of things that we're now overnight expected to be excellent in. I was interviewed on a fertility podcast recently. Again, there is an expectation that managers are equipped with these skills to be able to engage on some really deep and meaningful topics with their teams. And of course, unless you're being prepared for that by the organization, likely it is, you're probably just going to have to work it out for yourself and fumble your way through, which I think back in my day, I'm an older guy, I'm 47 years old, showing my age, this is a bit grey. In my day, I think we could probably do that because we kind of had no choice and there wasn't so much expectation, but the world of the manager has massively shifted and changed. What we talk about in this particular part, where we look at the role of a 21st century manager, is essentially what's the job of a great manager. And really, if you looked at what the job of a great CEO is, let's isolate one thing because we could be here for hours talking about this. You would argue, I'm sure, that the job of a great CEO would be to do one key thing, which is to be able to link some organizational strategy, mission, vision, culture, values, however that's described in terms of the articulation of where we're describing where we're going as an organization, and helping to translate that into something meaningful for me personally. I think this is a topic that I'd love to spend a bit more time on, so maybe we can do this in a subsequent live stream. But the job of the CEO, of a great CEO, of a world-class CEO, is to be able to link strategy, vision, mission, all that stuff to what that might mean for me personally. In the world of being a 21st century manager in March 2024, is that different for the role of the manager? And I would argue no. What we now know for sure is that the CEO, certainly of any mid to large organization, and when you start to become multinational, forget it. There is no way that any CEO is skillful enough to be able to complete this translation process and get that strategy, mission, vision into something meaningful for the individual. The role of the manager becomes center stage, and actually the manager becomes the most important. Now you could say, well, maybe that's functional, Wayne, because, of course, why wouldn't you want to translate strategy, vision, mission into something practical for people? Well, yes, that's important. And of course, we want that to happen. But the side we're more interested in is the emotional connection side, because look, I get to spend the majority of my time at work. I'm a lucky person, right? I get to spend 40, 50, 60 hours in some cases a week doing nothing but this, or doing nothing but what people do. We want to believe that what we're doing has got value, that it does have an impact, that it's making us more valuable. We'll come to that part. But there is something really important about a connection between what I would call me and we. How does the role of the manager play a key role in connecting we and me? I think in 2024 and on, it creates and is the most important person is the manager to do that. Now, why is that important in terms of when we say people leave managers? Well, again, think about some of the reasons why people might leave, why you might be compelled to leave, why you might be compelled to stay. We know that there often is no compelling reason to stay. It doesn't feel like there's a future here for me. It doesn't feel like it's exciting in any way. I can't really see maybe where my development is coming from, which we'll get into again. So there are a number of things wrapped up in this. But again, if we were to go back to a fundamental question, what is the job of the manager on March 27, 2024? And is that different than it currently is at the moment? The answer in most cases is probably yes. And what can we do as managers to really get into and look at that? Second big thing, we talk about what we call great goal setting in organizations. Now, interestingly, based on our research, and again, based on about 15,500 managers, if you just joined the stream, we know for sure, based on our data, that about 42% of managers in organizations around the world, this is global data, don't know what the actual goal of the organization is. Picture this, you're the CEO, right? You're going to go and talk to all of your team. Let's say you've got 100 of your top managers in the room. You're going to go and sit there and say, right, here is our vision, here's our mission, here's what we're trying to achieve as an organization. You're like, you got it? They're like, we got it. They walk out and actually 42% of them don't have a Scooby-Doo of what they think the goal of the organization is. And this is not because you've done a bad job as a CEO. It's not because they're stupid and didn't get it. It's because the method of transmitting information by broadcast like that with something so important and so deep to a large population is really difficult to achieve. The reason why most CEOs and leadership teams understand their strategy better than other people in the organization isn't because they're smarter than other people. I absolutely don't believe that the IQ of the leadership team is higher than everyone else in the company. It's not the case. What is the case is they probably spend more time than other people discussing their vision, mission, and those important aspects. Would it be the case that you would walk down the corridor and say, hi, Jane, what are you up to for lunch? And Jane's like, oh, not much. Fancy getting a sandwich, Jane, and talking about the vision and the mission and the goals of the organization, what it means to our team and what it might mean to you and I personally, Jane. Jane's probably going to say, no, thank you, Wayne. leave me alone. I don't want to have such a conversation. Maybe Jane would, I don't know. But the point is, of course, that we often don't have this conversation. Why is this conversation important? Well, because it's the exact conversation that the leadership team have all the time. They meet regularly, they talk about the vision, they talk about the purpose, they talk about the strategy, they talk about the organizational, operational goals. They discuss these things and therefore they mean much more to them. Probably also that there is an intrinsic, I can't say the word, there's an intrinsic motivation here, because I know that if we achieve X, I'm going to get Y. I can clearly see the payoff here. And if we do well over here, I'm going to benefit from that. Of course, what's in it for me? It's the whiffing factor. So again, when we think about this, now I'm the manager. I am 3 or 4 levels below the CEO or the CPO or the CFO or the many chiefs. But I'm 3 or 4 levels below. And my job is to try and translate something into something of a conversation with a member of the team. The likelihood is, based on what we found, and I would say that our numbers are biased because the majority of organizations who put themselves forward to go through our program, we're not forcing anyone to do it. They're generally organizations who believe and are prepared to invest in building the capability of line management, which therefore means they've got pretty good cultures. So it's quite a biased number, I think I'm sharing here in terms of our research. But we find that a huge portion of people have no idea what the goal of the organization is. Now, put yourself in the manager's shoes. I'm there as the line manager, trying to translate what into something with the team. Well, actually, there's nothing really there. There's some hearsay, right? And I tested this. So when I was my last corporate job many years ago, I was the head of employee engagement for a large accounting firm in London. I asked the partners of the firm, talk to me about the strategy of the firm over the next sort of 3 to 6 to 12 months. And they said, well, we've got these 6 strategic strands and we're going to work with companies that are of this size. I thought, this is beautiful. People really get it. And then what happened is the further I went away from central London where our office was to, I ended up in Glasgow talking to a more junior audit manager of the firm and said, explain to me what you think when the future comes to mind, what messages are there? And he looks at me and he's like, growth. I said, that's very good, very good. Anything more? And he's like, no, that's pretty much it, right? So what we found is the further we went away from the seat of power in the center by geographical distance and grade, the murkier the story got, right? So let's assume, let's make this easy, that half the population in the organization have no clue what the organizational goal is. I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume about half don't really know. So again, as a manager, how can I translate something into something relevant for the team member, which is key? And again, that important conversation is what we would call a great goal setting conversation becomes hyper important. So what 3 things that we look at? And again, you might be hopefully you're taking some notes here, or it might be that this is a refresher and you're like, Wayne, I am acing all of this. Everything you're saying, Wayne, I'm doing it all. If that's the case, then congratulations. But what we call great goal setting or great goal setting conversations are 3 key things. How do you set up the goal setting conversation? How do you execute it? And how do you follow it up? 3 real simple principles to think about. But this is hyper important when it comes to this. Now, of course, what we want to do is help our teams to be able to develop a goal that works for them. The fact that we might want to grow the company by X%, or we want to deliver exceptional service delivery to our clients or customers, or we want to be number 1 in our chosen markets, all really interesting stuff. But actually, when it comes to my day-to-day job, not that interesting. I'm more fired up by something that's hyper local to me. So again, the job of the manager, of course, is how do we do that? Now, it could be that you've got no idea of what the organizational strategy, all that big picture stuff. Does it matter? Well, it kind of does, but in this context of setting great goals, as long as we're quite clear on what the team should be doing, of course, then we can hopefully try and translate it into something relevant and hopefully inspiring for the individuals in the team. The key is, of course, is this E word, the big E word, when we talk about empathy, is understanding where someone is, understanding where they want to get to. If you don't understand that, then that's the 3rd part we're going to come to in a minute. But I think this is a really important part of any engaging conversation, and to, of course, try and link, vision, mission to something personal. So when we talk first, number 1, if I can do a quick recap, we talked about this idea of linking big vision to what we're doing personally, but asking a fundamental question: what's the job of the manager going forward? And I suspect it's going to have a lot to do with translating vision. It's going to have a lot to do with delivering for the people who you're designed to deliver for, your customers, your stakeholders, your shareholders, whoever it is the organization serves. And then the 3rd part of that is, of course, being laser focused on getting the very best from the individual in the team. That's number 1. Number 2, we talk about this important area of what we call great goal setting. Number 3, which is very much linked to number 2, and the reason why we split this out is for a good reason, is what we call inspiring appraisal conversations. Now, I don't know about you, but actually think about it for a second. Rewind back in time. I'm going to give you a second. Think back to your first manager, or the first sort of person who played a management or supervisory role in your career, in the sense of someone who was maybe really good at having those type of one-to-ones with you, or maybe someone who wasn't so good. If you think back, it allows me to take a drink. I should get this sponsored by Gales, by the way. It isn't, but maybe that's for the next one. So when you think back about your experience, think back to, again, what was the experience like and how did you leave feeling? I guarantee that every single one of those conversations, you leave with an emotion. You could leave feeling judged. You could leave feeling excited, exhilarated. You could leave feeling unclear. There are all sorts of emotions you leave with. The one thing we talk about, and again, this applies whether you're a multinational billion-dollar corporation and have unbelievable amounts of resource to throw at this, or it applies whether you're a absolute tiny charity with zero budget for anything, right? The same applies for all of this, which is why we looked at this word quite intently, which is what we call an inspiring appraisal conversation. We want people to leave these one-to-ones feeling inspired. Now, inspired doesn't mean that we're jumping up and down, throwing high fives, fist bumping, saying, aren't we cool? Look at us. That's not the sort of inspiration we're talking about. We're talking here about something that works for the individual. But in order to work for the individual, we as managers, of course, have to understand what those individuals want. And this might be a simple case of asking the question of what it is that someone actually wants. The reason why we think this is so powerful and the reason why it absolutely works is because for many of the people I've come across, whether they've been hyper successful in their chosen careers, from the outside looking in, it looks like it's a certain way, or whether or not they've sort of struggled to get further up the career ladder for all sorts of reasons. What we often find out is people aren't generally that clear about what it is that they actually want. And if you think about it, how many human beings, maybe we should run this as a poll, how many human beings have had a deep and meaningful conversation with someone about their life, their dreams, their career, their hopes, their aspirations? If you've had that with either a parent or been lucky enough to have a couple of parents and have that type of conversation with, I think you're in the minority, right? Because there are very few people who've had a deep and meaningful conversation with someone. And it might not be the case that you've got uncaring parents, but it might be that they just weren't sort of equipped to have that type of conversation with you. Why? Because maybe they've never built a career like that for themselves. So when it comes to having this really important, deep, meaningful conversation, this is something that I genuinely believe it's not something you're born with, it's something you can practice and perfect, but it requires an investment of time and effort. So as a manager, again, how good can I get? This is something that I focus on personally quite a lot. I'm constantly trying to understand, what do people want? What do they need? What can I do in a way that's a true win-win in order to deliver for them and deliver for us? The challenge is, if I can't work out what would be work for them or what would deliver for them, then there's no way of me tying these two things together. So when we talk about what we would call an inspiring appraisal conversation, how can we make sure that we're having this? This may be on the flip side, right, where you've genuinely left organizations because you've had a real scumbag of a manager, a real toxic manager, someone that you're hopeful that you're never going to see again in your life. Again, you may be in that moment right now. And, given what we found out on the poll this morning, I suspect many of us are in these relationships, if you look at it that way, that we probably don't want to be in anymore if we could help it. So how do you mitigate and manage some of this? One of the things I would suggest, if you've got a very difficult manager, is try, if possible, and it doesn't always work, let's be truthful and let's be realistic, but try, if possible, to change the nature of how you engage in that conversation. Because often what can happen is there's a game that gets played. Every 6 to 12 months, hopefully at least, we're going to sit down together. I'm in your team. I am the most junior person. And we're going to have a one-to-one or a conversation about where my career is going and so on. Hopefully it's more frequent. In some cases, in some of the best organizations we come across, they're doing this monthly, or at the very least, they'll be doing this on a 12-weekly basis, which is what my personal guidance would be, that this should be about once a quarter, would make absolute sense, given all of the other time demands and stuff we've got on our plates. So again, when we're sitting down to have this conversation, could we change the nature of it? It might be that we always do this in the office. Can we go out and grab a coffee, grab some lunch, something, have a dinner? It might sound a bit weird because you might not have that type of relationship, but can you change the nature of how you engage? That can sometimes change a hell of a lot when it comes to the type of conversation you have. Actually, last year when we launched the book in New York, we shot a series of 12 videos. They're on our website, worldclassmanager.com. They're all free, and we shot a series of 12 quite short videos about these topics. So I don't have the chance to cover all of them today, but we go into this in a bit more detail in some of those with some more facts and figures as well. But yeah, number 3, inspiring appraisal conversations is key. Number 4, huge one, massive one, where we talk about optimizing time, right? Now, how much time do we have? The truth is not much. If you've got Spidey vision, let's super maximize here. If you've got Spidey vision, you can see that as a man, we're on average around 79 years. Women are doing much better, around on average 82.81 years. So if that's how long we're going to live on average, do the maths. I can do the maths. I can subtract, I'm 47 from number 79. It's a worrying number, really, isn't it? When you stop to consider it, right? I'm more than halfway. Let's get this done soon, right? Our time is limited. Time is our most precious resource, depending on how you look at things. And of course, you may believe that we're going to have a reincarnation moment and come back again, and we've got another opportunity to have another shot at this. Or you may believe, which I'm sure for the majority of people, that we may actually only have one go at this. If this is the case, then our time becomes hyper important, hyper precious to us. How do we maximize the time that we've got in terms of, or optimize the time that we've got to make it have the best impact? One of the things, if I can just cut to the chase, because we can talk about this all day, one of the things I would urge you to and challenge you to think about is how could you identify, here's a goal, 10 to 20% of your week that you could set aside and keep that time sacrosanct and use it in something that's tremendously value adding, right? That might be really value adding to you personally. It might be really value adding to your team or to the people your team serves, your customers, your clients, patients, if you're an NHS trust, depends on who you are and what you do. Or it could be that this is something where you want to have a huge impact on your organization or even on your entire industry. Depends how ambitious you want to be. The key, though, is working out how do you identify 10 to 20% of your time and using that time effectively. Why is this important? Well, because I would suspect if I came and asked you now to share on screen, which I won't, if I came and asked you to share on screen right now your diary over the next sort of, 3 to 4 weeks, I would suspect that your diary is probably going to be chock-a-block and really busy. I suspect that you're not looking at your diary over the next few days, apart from maybe an Easter break if you're in parts of Europe maybe, but over the next few days and saying, right, actually, I've got loads of space in the diary. I don't know what to do with myself. Please help me out, Wayne. We don't get any requests like that. What we get are requests which saying, I'm absolutely maxed out all the time. How can I change this? The interesting thing about time is that you often believe that there was a moment in the past where you had more time. There's this sort of weird belief that in the future, we're going to have more time. And the truth is, of course, that we're always in the present. And in the present, there is never any time because we're always so busy. What we try and do as very busy people is fix the time problem in the present, but it feels unfixable because we don't have any time and space to even think about creating that space and time. And one of our very, very, very simple tips is to say, right, let's pick a moment in your calendar where your life starts to look a little bit easier. For most busy managers, busy people, you would say probably 2 to 3 months out, most people's diaries starts to get a little bit thinner. There starts to be a bit more like white empty space in those diaries. Maybe from the 1st of July or 1st of August, you can say, right, I'm going to plan out half a day or a day a week and keep that time sacrosanct. The million-dollar question, of course, is what do you do with that time? Well, only you know the answer to that, and only you can work out what would be value-adding. But how do you identify a proportion of your week and say, right, I'm going to keep that time for something, and then give some thought to what you might like to use that time for? One of the big issues that we come across in many organizations, going back to the 81% number at the beginning, and actually, it's part of the reason why I'm always interested in this show, The Undercover CEO. If you think about it, what happens if you watch The Undercover CEO or Undercover Boss, as they call it in the US, at the beginning, they show the CEO who says, they've had this epiphany moment, or they've obviously agreed to do the show. They're going to go undercover and go and find out what's going on in their organization. Usually the next scene is that would be the CEO with the rest of the leadership team. They sit around the table and the CEO says, right, obviously this is all recorded on camera, and says to the leadership team, I'm decided I'm going to go undercover and see what's going on in the organization. At that moment, if you watch any of these shows, what did the leadership team do? Do they sit there and say, yes, this is fantastic. At last, I'm going to get the CEO to come into my team and see what's going on and celebrate the wins? No, most of the people around the table look scared as hell. Why? Because they know that stuff's going to get found out. They know that the stuff that they should have spent time focusing on is going to get uncovered by the CEO. Have you ever seen an episode where the CEO gets to the end of it and says there was nothing to change? Everything was perfect. Well, no, of course not. And it's not because people are being evil inherently and trying to hide things either. It's not that. We are so fundamentally busy, and there are always things that we wish we could spend time on, but we can't, or it doesn't feel like we can because we don't have the space to do it. So the idea here is when we look at the hyper successful individuals, and let's use him as an example, love him or hate him, let's talk about someone like an Elon Musk. He's got the same 24 hours in the day that you and I have, and runs a multiple number of companies, has, a huge family and huge commitments, as I would imagine. How does he and other people like him manage to achieve so much in the same time period? There is something here really important about giving a rethink to how we utilize our time. Now, put this in the context of why we're here discussing this morning, which is about why do people leave organizations. It can often feel like everything is so overwhelming. There is no plan. I'm getting hit from left and right with sort of ideas from people. It feels too much. I feel out of control. I want to go somewhere where life might be a bit more ordered. If you find somewhere like that, let me know, because we don't find many, but that's often one of the ideals and one of the issues. We feel out of control. So again, how do we get back in control? You could be the most junior person in the organization. There is still something we can do to try and get some control back, and which is why identifying a portion of time that we could spend thinking about something really value adding for you, for your team, for your organization would be really important as well. And again, as a line manager, as a people manager, if you had an opportunity to spend 10 to 20% of your week, how could you utilize that time valuably? And I think there's so much you could do. There's so much impact that you could make, but often it's hard to because we often don't have the time. Number 4 is where we look at what we call improving communication. Now, on my travels, we're constantly on the road. Well, I'm certainly constantly on the road, moving around, talking to different organizations, companies, governments, and everything in between. Everything that I've seen everywhere on the planet points to one challenge that we see consistently. There isn't a place on earth where I've gone where they said, Wayne, we've solved communications. Yeah, we've solved it. We've got it all worked out. Everyone seems to get everything that they need to know on a regular basis in a format that works for them, through a channel that really works for them. I've been and asked the people, and I've interviewed them, Wayne, and I said, could we do anything to improve communications? And they were like, no, we're good. It doesn't happen, never happens, never found anywhere like it. Conversely, every single organization that we've ever spoken to says, of course, we want to improve communications. Now, is it because organizations cannot improve communications, therefore this is an unsolvable challenge? Actually, on a mass scale, I think the answer is yes, which should be a liberation moment. If your specialism is focused on improving communications, you cannot improve organizational communications to the point where everyone says everything's working perfectly well. It's a utopian fantasy. If you look at it as a psychologist would look at, it's a psychological fantasy, right? What we can do though is we can improve the perception of communications in our teams. And for most people, yes, I'm concerned what's going on in our industry. That's kind of interesting. Trends are changing, things are happening, movers and shakers are moving and shaking. There are things that are relevant to the company that interest me a bit more. There are things that are interesting in the department that interest me even more. I'm more interested though in what's going on in my team, and I'm really interested in what's going on in between myself and the line manager. So when it comes to improving communication, most people are concerned, for most of the time anyway, with something that's a bit more personal and selfishly motivated around their world. And here's the key to the answer, right? Ask people in the team 3 very, very simple questions. What do you want to know? How often? And how best can I get that information to you? What do you want to know? How often? And how best can I get that information to you? Now, this might be the case that you speak to someone and they say, I really want to know strategically how we're doing as an organization. I would love to find that out on a monthly basis, and maybe over a coffee would be fantastic. If you deliver on that and then ask that person in a few months' time, do you think communications is improving? What are they going to say? They're going to say yes. Why? Because their personal and selfish conditions for improved communications have now been met. It might be someone else wants to know, I want like hardcore stats in an Excel spreadsheet sent to me every week on an email. That for me would be absolutely perfect. And maybe there is some policy stuff in the organization I want to know about. Wayne, thank you very much. I'm good. And that person is absolutely fine. Or it could even be the extreme case. Hopefully not, but it does exist. And we know that you've probably got anywhere between 5 to 10% of any workforce who absolutely hate the company and love nothing else than to get out and do something else. Will they leave? Maybe not. It's another conversation for another webinar, another live stream. But we know that you're going to talk to some people and say, what do you want to know about? The answer would be nothing. How often? Who cares? When would you like to know that information? Whatevs. Okay, fair enough. Right, we know some people fundamentally couldn't care less, right? That's fine. But this process of working out who in the team does care, what they care about, how I can best serve them, of course, means that we've got a good shot now at changing the perception of how we improve communications. Roll this all the way back up to the top. If you are the CEO and you've got a mega corporation across multiple jurisdictions and time zones, and you've got hundreds or thousands of managers, again, this is a really important discipline culturally that you could instill across the entire management population, because what we want, of course, is the objective of improving communications. I'll put this, it's going to sound like a riddle. It's really subjective. It's probably a better word to use. My perception of improved communications is true to me and valid to no one else. You may have the same two people doing the same exact job in the same exact team who complain about very different things when it comes to improving communication, and they're both correct. But because my role or my sort of view of communications is personal to me, if I think it's improving, then as far as I'm concerned, it probably is as well. Something else here I wanted to share with you in terms of the data, because we now know, based on our own research, that about 45% of managers are not confident in talking with people. We're not talking about making big presentations. We're not talking about standing on stage and talking to an audience. We're talking about 45% of managers are not actually confident when talking to other people. And this is a really important thing to think about, right? So it may be that you're on the junior side of the team and you could have a level of empathy for the manager. Maybe they're struggling with some stuff, which is often the case. You may be a manager and thinking, well, I know I've now got to go into all these different forums. I've got to go to meetings. I've got to put my message across. I've got to have these one-to-ones. I've got to do these inspiring appraisal conversations. I've got to check up on how people are doing. These are all quite confronting things that we're often given, in a way, zero preparation for as a line manager. So we know that a huge population of people are not confident when it comes to being able to speak and engage with other people. So again, a cue, we've come across nearly every organization is working with some form of coach. I'm sure you know a coach. There's a million excellent coaches on LinkedIn. Find yourself a great coach, work with someone like that, to help your management team build that important bench strength, that key skill of being able to firstly even feel confident to engage, because often we're not given any support or any prep around something like that. Number 5, let's see how we're getting on for time. Number 5 is something that we look at, which I'm sure will be dear to your hearts. When you start your working week, it begins with an intention where you say, oh, I'm really looking forward to spending 3 of my days on average this week in meetings. That is a great use of time. I remember Wayne was talking about the fact that women only live to 81 years and men only live to 79. Oh, if I could just spend 2/3 of that time I've got on the planet in meetings, that would be awesome. Sorry. We know that this is an insanity, but it's the truth, right? In most companies we've come across, about 2/3 of managers spend their times, about 2/3 of a manager's week will be spent in meetings. About 1/3 of that time on average, based on what we found out, would be seen as value-adding time by the manager. But even worse for members of the team who get invited to things that they can't in a way say no to. Bad idea politically, could really shoot myself in the foot, but I don't want to go and spend 2 hours sitting in this thing. Total waste of time. I don't even contribute anything anyway. Some interesting meeting stats here that you can see on screen. Let's maximize. I think this is worthy of maximization, right? 70% of people say that they bring other work to meetings. If you think they're there for you, the likelihood is that they're probably not. Hard enough even face-to-face, but even more difficult when you're doing this remotely. Who knows what they're up to? About 39% of people admit to having a sleep in meetings or falling asleep in meetings. So, before the next meeting, fluff up those pillows, get the duvets out, read a lullaby. It's going to get cozy. And then the last one is about half the people who attend meetings, about 47%, based on what we found out, would say that meetings are a total waste of time, right? So think about this from another perspective. Put the CFO hat on for a minute and let's work out an average of how much money your average manager costs in an organization and say, right, let's assume then that 2/3 of that cost is being spent of their time in meetings. I mean, this is a horrific number if you look at it from a cost point of view. If you're the CFO, if you're the CEO, I mean, even probably more alarming if you're thinking about, I'm trying to get these really important strategic messages our key customers, our clients, our regulators, the market is telling us X. I need to get that stuff into the heads of all the managers so that it transforms their behavior, so they act in accordance with what we're learning from the outside environment all the time. This is a big strategic challenge as a CEO. As a chief marketing officer, the world's evolving rapidly. We need to change the way that we're presenting ourselves to the outside world. But I can't really do that because 2/3 of these managers' week is spent in this time. There's all sorts of strategic challenges that every single leadership team on the planet would love to shift the manager's perception of, and how much time of their week have they got access to managers? Well, probably not that much, given what we keep finding out in organizations. So meetings can be one of these things culturally, I think this is important, that often can really repel you from an organization because it feels like you're getting nowhere. So again, as an individual contributor, as the most junior person in the organization who might decide to vote with your feet and leave, how could we transform the quality of meetings? Now, you may not have control of some of the big macro meetings that happen on a quarterly, monthly basis that you're invited to, again, by someone senior, but you can't say no to it. But you probably do have a lot of control over the regular interactions of the team, and how might you change it? Here's the goal. Here's the goal. Imagine creating a meeting, is what we look at, where everyone actually wants to attend it, right? That's the utopian dream. Are we high? Are we on some form of drug saying this? No, of course not. The reason why someone would want to attend the meeting, of course, is that they get something out of it, or they're unbelievably altruistic, which is maybe less than 1% of the population, who just want to contribute 2 hours of their precious life to achieving something for the organization at some point in the future. That's probably not even going to work out, right? Given all the other things that change. Most people are more concerned about something that's valuable for them. So looking at the other way around, how do we make our meetings feel ultimately more valuable for the people who attend them? Last one I'm going to look at, because there's too many here, but when we look at what we call understanding our customer or understanding who we serve. And again, I think this is one of the most important areas where we can truly engage our teams in a clever way that makes the organization culturally feel more sticky. If we're looking at reasons to compel people to stay, not to leave, I think this is a really interesting area. The reason why is because in many companies that we come across, there is often a big misconception about what the customer actually wants. There are so many organizations, if you look through the list of the history of failed corporations, of the big name brands that we can all, I'm sure, name, there's usually a story where they just got it wrong. They just didn't get what the customer was saying. They didn't understand what was happening with the market. If only they would have listened to people who were telling them for years that they should have sold this product or done it in this way or positioned themselves in this way. Right? Often the organization is very disconnected actually from what the customer actually wants from them. And we've seen this in a number of organizations. We found organizations like, if you know me or know us, you know that I'm this absolute evangelist of an organization called Red Carnation. They own a number of hotels across the world, and they are the exemplar, in my opinion, of truly understanding their customer. They rank #1 in literally every city on the planet where they have a hotel in terms of customer feedback, customer service. This is an organization obsessed and deeply empathic and caring about what the customer says, and it makes sure that everyone in the organization understands how important that is and don't feel disconnected from it. This is one of the areas where it can really change the dynamic for a team. Could we, with myself and 3 or 4 people in my team, if we're a small team, do something else to understand what our clients might want from us? This can be a really engaging exercise. It gives junior people an access to a level of seniority and thought process and strategic thinking that often they can never get otherwise. And here's the thing, if let's put it the other way. Would it ever be a bad thing to be seen as being someone who's strategic by the leadership team? Would a leader ever look on a manager or on a junior member of the team and say, you know what, you're thinking too strategically. Oh my gosh, your critical thinking is really disturbing me. This is too critical. You're putting too much intelligent thought into thinking these thoughts. Where do you think these thoughts? This is never, ever going to be a bad thing. But again, so maybe here's the answer. Maybe I've just answered something for myself. Maybe if we're going to optimize time and identify 10 to 20% of the week that you could spend doing something else, even if it's an hour a week, right? This is valuable. Maybe that hour is valuable time spent in getting closer to the customer, understanding what the customer wants, and therefore sort of acing the hell out of what the customer wants. Now, when I'm talking about a customer, I'm aware that many of us, if we're in an internal or a practice management function, a professional service function, we could be in HR, IT, We could be in finance where we're serving other internal stakeholders. This is the exact same challenge, right? How do we make sure that we really understand who we're delivering for, what they need and what we can do? This is one of the most excellent exercises you can do as a team. It costs you like $0, $0, £0, and is something that is tremendously engaging. Final point on this final statistic, right? And this is a big one. I'm ending on a big number here. We found out that 46.7% of managers do not understand the numbers. They don't understand the finances of the organization. I mean, I don't know if this alarms you or bothers you. It bothers me because I just think, if you're talking to your entire management population, and again, the bigger the organization, the more complex, how do they understand the numbers? In many cases, not very well. Interestingly, if you look at the hyper large multinational corporations, let's look at a typical stock market listed company that every 3 months is grilled. If you've ever attended an analyst call every 3 months, it's fascinating to watch or listen into, because the financial analysts, the fund managers will grill, literally, they're sauteing the CEO and the CFO of the organization live in front of the population to challenge them on their numbers. Will they be at or meet or exceed expectations in terms of what investors want, et cetera, et cetera. The organization puts an unbelievable amount of effort into those conversations, of course, because they're really important for the shareholders. Often then what happens is internally that knowledge, that debate, that rigor isn't then shared. Often what happens is you get another set of numbers which trickle down. People often believe that there is this magical fairy that descends. We call it the cascade fairy. It waves its magic dust over the population, and then all of a sudden there's a sort of realization. People say, oh, I know, like Neo in the Matrix, like remember that moment where he knows Kung Fu. I know the numbers. This never happens. So what we know is that we need to translate these numbers through us, the managers, into something relevant for the team. And again, this is a really important conversation. And we found out from our research that hardly any managers actually understand what the finances of the organization are. You may argue that's not important for your organization. I can't understand why that would never be important for all sorts of reasons that we don't have time to get into. So again, when we look at some of these areas, and just again as a real brief summary, because I know we're short on time, when we look at some of these areas where we look at, again, number one, we're talking about this 21st century manager. How do we make sure that we link what I'm doing to what we're trying to achieve as an organization? If you then take the next step, how does that flow into what we would call a great goal setting conversation? And this is quite functional. You don't need to be this inspirational, extroverted individual to inspire this part of it. This is absolutely operational. How do we take and chunk down a big, hairy, audacious goal or a big ambitious plan into something manageable and something that we as the team can have an impact on? Number three, where we look at what we would call the role ultimately of being able to inspire people in conversations. Number four, where we looked at this challenge of optimizing time. We've only got so much time on the planet. How do we optimize that? And then the fifth area, where we look at this really important area, again, of how do we understand what our customers want and able to deliver for them as well. And the other one of looking at how do we improve communications. So I think you can probably see when we look at all of this, we've got 5 or 6 big things that we can do. If anyone tells you ever, or they market to you the idea that they've got the definitive answer on how do we solve this challenge because they've got a model that works, they are lying through their teeth, because it's not possible, right? And as often as we looked at, we've been at this job of management and getting the very best out of people for thousands of years. If this was truly a science, we'd have an equation for it by now, and we don't. It's an art form. It's something that we practice. It's something that we spend lots of time and energy on. It's something that I personally have invested a huge chunk of my life into trying to be better at, learn about, learn from the best, and then, of course, translate that into something that we can share with people and make their lives much easier, much more fruitful, and make their journey much cleaner and faster as well. So 5, 6 big things. Again, we absolutely thank you for attending the live stream with us. If you want to find out more information on us, it's down here, worldclassmanager.com. We're going to try to do this every week on multiple platforms. So to share with you some of our latest tools, tips, insights, best practices as we keep coming across. And again, look forward to meeting with you and engaging with you again on this journey. And thank you very, very much for being here with us as part of this stream. See you soon.